Hey everyone, in today's video, I'm going to be going over the best mage build you can use. Now what sets this aside from other mage focused builds is not just being able to do tons of damage from a very far distance, but it also heavily debuffs the enemies you come up against. So not only are you going to do lots of damage, but your teammates or summonings as well. It's like a support build that can also obliterate the toughest bosses easily. Anyways, before I get into this setup, I want to thank the sponsors of today's video, dammods.com. They'll get tons of runes for you, just allowing you to max out your character extremely quickly without having to put in vigorous amounts of hours getting them yourself, because we all know how tedious that can be. They work on all platforms, PlayStation, Xbox, and PC. They're also trusted by thousands of users on Trustpilot with a 5-star rating and over 6 years of experience. Links will be in the description down below. Again, thank you DamMods for sponsoring the video. So when you start the game off, you're going to want to go with the Astrologer class. This is not only going to give you the most optimal levels for this build, but it's also what I'm using, so you'll be able to copy my exact stats with no issues at all. Now when you are putting points into this setup, I'd highly recommend getting 12 Strength, 12 Dex, 24 Intelligence, and 24 Faith first. This is just going to allow you to use the Sword of Night and Flame, which is a very powerful weapon in this setup that'll take you all the way to the end game and more. Afterwards, I'd recommend putting more points into Mine first so you can use the Ash of War and spells more often. Vigor for obviously more health, but not too much into it because you don't need a lot of health since this build is very focused on attacking from a distance. And finally, Intelligence to increase our overall damage. In addition, since this build is very focused on hitting enemies from a distance, I definitely recommend the Ritual Sword Talisman to increase all of your damage by 10% while at full health. This buff should always be active because there's no reason at all for you to get up close, especially with the weapons we're using. Speaking of that, one of the weapons we are using in this setup, as mentioned before, is the Sword of Night and Flame. Now the basic attacks are on par with most straight swords. Nothing special, but not horrible. So when it comes to dealing with bigger guys, they're just not going to cut it, because they don't have any stagger effect at all, except for the heavy attacks. So to deal with these bigger enemies, we're going to use the Ash of War on it, the Night and Flame stance. More exactly, the magical laser bee one. This Ash of War will blast every enemy with so much damage you won't ever think about using the sword's basic attacks. And not just that, we also have a lot of mana for it. It's got good damage, medium range, strong knockback effect, and it can be casted fairly quickly, so you can use this back to back with no problems at all. It's as effective as it is visually pleasing, to say the least. And because it's an Ash of War, you can toss on the Shard of Alexander's to bump up all Ashes of War damage by an extra 15%, just making this attack even more menacing. So you're probably thinking, where can I find these items now? But not to worry, I got you covered. To get the Sword of Night and Flame, you'll have to reach the Karya Manor. It's decently early into the game, so you're not going to have to progress too far to at least start the build. More exactly, you'll want to be at the Manor lower level Site of Grace. From here, follow exactly where I go and you'll find it in a chest. Don't even have to fight anything. How nice is that for an extremely powerful weapon? Next, for the Ritual Sword Talisman, you'll have to defeat a demi-human queen that can be found in the Lux Ruins. With the Sword of Night and Flame, you'll make quick work of this boss with ease. And lastly, for the Shard of Alexander, you can be rewarded this after completing the Iron Fist Alexander questline, which I would highly recommend doing so since this talisman is used in so many builds in general. Bit of a spoiler coming up to how his questline ends.
You are ready then, I take it? Then let us begin.
I am the great Jar Warrior. Let's be straight, warrior. Let's become one champion together.
But the great Alexander lived as a warrior to his last.
So that's about half of the build's damage right there, just using the sword to blast away all of the bigger guys easily. Although, when it does come to bosses, the sword can still cause a good amount of destruction, no question about it. Except the spells we can throw out beforehand are not only going to do similar amounts of damage from a much farther distance, but they're also going to debuff bosses, making them take 20% increased damage and lowering their magic resistance by 10%. Just like I said at the beginning, this applies to teammates as well. Now the spell we can use to get this effect is Ranni's Dark Moon. Your character levitates into the fetal position and then throws out a magical moon at whoever you're aiming at. The damage on it is really solid, you can cast it from far distances, and the tracking rarely misses its target. All around, it's a good spell, but it gets even better because of those debuffs. So when you hit an enemy with this spell, it takes away 10% of that target's magic resistance for 60 seconds, meaning they're going to take more magic damage from any sources. The second part of this spell is it also builds up 270 frost buildup per attack. So in about 2 to 3 uses, you can proc frost, which is just going to take a chunk of their health away and make them take 20% increased damage for 30 seconds. It's a very powerful spell, however, it does take a long time to cast, which honestly I don't have any issues with since you can cast it from the other side of the room easily, but there are going to be some people out there that hate this. So to get around this, you can use the Azur's Glintstone Staff that increases the casting speed of spells for the exchange of making them cost more mana. It's a bit of a trade-off, but again, if the casting speed really bothers you, there's ways around it. More importantly, there is a second spell we can use that increases the damage of both Ranni's Dark Moon and the Sword of Night and Flame, Terra Magica. I hope I pronounced that right. This just creates a patch on the ground that increases all magic damage by 35% for 30 seconds when standing in it. So pretty much run to the other side of the room, throw down Terra Magica, let your summoning or teammate distract the boss for a second, and throw out a couple of Ranni's Dark Moons. After you proc a freeze buildup, they're going to take 30% increased damage from magical attacks. So that's when you would get a bit closer and start using the laser beam attack since it's going to do more damage. And just sitting at the back of a room only throwing out spells can get pretty boring, so this lets you get into the fight more without being too much at risk of taking damage. Now to get Azur's Staff, you can find this on the second floor of the Church of the Cuckoo in the Academy on the east side. With Ranni's Dark Moon, you'll have to make a lot of progress through Ranni's questline to the point where you can fight Estelle, the Natural Born of the Void. It's quite a process of getting this, but completely worth it. Since this is kinda late into the game, a nice secondary option to this spell is Renella's Full Moon. Again, I don't know if I pronounced that right, but anyways, this spell is almost the exact same thing except you don't get that freeze buildup effect. You still reduce an enemy's magic resistance by 10% and get similar amounts of damage out. This can be acquired after defeating Renella, who is the final boss in the Rhea Lucaria Academy. Use her Remembrance Ashes at the round table to cash out for the spell. I'd also highly recommend duplicating her Remembrance so you can also get the Carrion Regal Scepter, the other staff we use that increases the damage of both full moon sorceries by 10%. The easiest place you can go to duplicate them is from the Walking Mausoleum in the Weeping Peninsula. Knock down all the legs and go through the doors. Before you do that, you can grab the spell Terra Magica after completing the Crystal Cave dungeon and taking the lift behind the boss's door. Now another buff we can use that is even better than Terra Magica is the Flask of Wondrous Physic. There's only 2 tiers you'll absolutely want to have. The Magic Shrouding tier, increasing all of our magic damage by 20% for 3 minutes, which is pretty much all of our damage. And the Cerulean Hidden tier, giving you infinite mana for 15 seconds. Yes, we do have a lot of mana in this setup, but this tier saves us the use of a few flasks and time since you won't have to stop casting spells to drink the flask. My recommendations for this here is to use it right after you've gone to the other side of a room and before you've placed down Terra Magica. So when you spam Ranni's Dark Moon, you can cast it endlessly for 15 seconds. Believe me, that's a lot of time for the amount of damage you'll be pumping out. Another thing to add to this build to make it more effective is the type of summoning you use. Personally, I've been going with the Dung Eater because he's extremely aggressive, tanky, and he offers a debuff to the enemies he's attacking. It works really well because he takes all of the focus while I can stay in the back line throwing out tons of support. You don't need the Dung Eater exactly, any highly aggressive summoning will do just fine, especially since you can end boss fights extremely quickly. Anyways, I'll show you guys where you can find the tiers for the Flask of Wondrous Physic. For the Magic Shrouding one, you'll have to defeat an Erdtree avatar boss that can be found northeast of Liurnia of the Lakes. Just look for the big glowing tree and he'll be right under it. Next, the Cerulean Hidden tier can be dropped after defeating a different type of boss, but this one can also be found at a minor Erdtree, this one being in the Mount Gelmir area. Coming to the end of the build, let's take a look at the best armor we can use. So with the headpiece, you'll want to grab the Snow Witch hat. This is going to increase the damage of all cold spells, like Ranni's Dark Moon, by 10%. Then the rest of the armor is just the Spellblade set, increasing the damage of magic and cold related Ashes of War by 2% for each piece of the set. In total, we get a 6% damage increase on the magical Laser Beam Ash of War. Now, the problem with this armor is it is fairly light, so we don't get a whole lot of protection from it. So to get around this issue, we can use the Dragoncrest Great Shield Talisman, increasing our armor by 20%. It really helps out, stopping us from getting one-shotted by the more powerful bosses in the game. And it also reduces the negative effects of our last talisman, the Magic Scorpion Charm, increasing all of our magic damage by 12% for the exchange of 10% reduced armor. That Dragoncrest Great Shield Talisman really gets its use in this setup. Now all that's left to do is show you guys where you can find them. With the Snow Witch hat, you'll be able to pick this up on the upper floor of Renna's Rise during the course of Ranni's questline. Until then, you can use the Spellblade set that's dropped from Sorcerer Roger once he goes to the Round Table. After defeating Godric, let some time pass by and you'll find Roger dead at the Round Table with his full armor set on the ground. Next, when you're doing Ranni's questline, don't progress too far or you'll be locked out of getting the Magic Scorpion Charm. You'll have to give Preceptor Celavis the Amber Light in exchange for the Magic Scorpion Charm.
Ah, Oh, yes, I should give you your reward. Yeah, please. It's all yours. It's splendid work. It's just marvelous.
And lastly, for the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman, you'll want to reach the Drainage Tunnel, Site of Grace, and the Halleck Tree. From here, just follow exactly where I go. Well, that covers everything for today's build. Before I end the video off, I do want to give a big thanks to the members of my channel for supporting me on my videos and the future ones to come. Thanks for watching everyone, and I hope I see you all in the next one.
Tarnished. Thy strength be